Lorig Lobsang Jampa Geshe lama Thubten Rabten said Lorig Yupenade Dang Geshe Thubten Rabten Lobsang Dorje Baba Geshe said Dibado Sarva Nakasang Di Yamadela Yiju Gorshe and it does Chero.
Good evening. So we're going to continue to look at the sevenfold presentation of awareness and knowers. So of the seven, we've already looked at direct perception, inferential valid cognizer, subsequent cognizer, correct assumption, so those four. And now we come to the fifth, non-ascertaining awareness. We're still leaving doubt and wrong consciousnesses.
Yiju said the Yiju said the Yijula Toba in Gura. Just a Yiju de la Toba in Goza, Ranyu Zingur de and Ranyu Dunjinan Teo Gunet Simba and Ranyu Shemba said the Ranyu Zinyodu, Dunjinan Teo Gunet Nanji Simba de la Ranyu Shemba. And she and Zimba Nashi, you Yorde in a you the Motoba in the Lua said. It's not the Niki Ranula Shimpu, Louis Shinrik Dun said it. Then I want to each get in the said the kissing that each said in the Chilungo Sungure Seshira. Just not Ranula Shimpu, Louis Shinrik Dun, Ranyu, you did not your do Dungeon and Teokon and Nangores, Nangin, you did Zingores. The Zingor de in a Zimbana, you do your day in a you do Totugo, Matobanza, and the Lua, just a Louis Shenrik, Dundun Labdu, or you Zimbana, Donna, you do Yobache, Donna Tumba Yuba Zimba Yoba Dundunje. Matoba in the Lua, just another Ranula Shimbi, Ranula Shimbi, Louis Shenrik Dundun said, you should get 10 years another, is you more than on the Nisharwa.
Last time we looked at the correct assumption. So amongst the sevenfold division, last weekend we also looked at the type of mind that is a correct assumption. So correct assumption is not a direct perceiver, rather it is a conceptual consciousness. And being a conceptual consciousness, it apprehends its object together with a meaning generality. So the object as well as the object's meaning generality are both apprehended by the consciousness, hence it's a conceptual consciousness and not a direct perception. Then the object is apprehended in accordance with how it exists in that it's factually concordant. However, a correct assumption does not realize its object. Hence we saw in its definition that it's controvertible, meaning it does not realize the object. But the object, though, is apprehended in a factually concordant manner, but it is apprehended together with its meaning generality. Tonight then we'll continue on page 13 with the fourth of the sevenfold division, non-ascertaining awarenesses. So non-ascertaining awarenesses, these are only with direct perceptions, they only accompany direct perceptions, not conceptual consciousnesses.
Sawa Nawayins, Rangi Julu Gibe Ransella Neba 10 Minuba Yimbi, Shitunbu Gibe Riba said, Ladelia, and the Dustine, Nala Mangi Tingi said in the Shagdua.
Before we look at the definition, then just to say something quickly on the side of translation. So you'll know this elsewhere sometimes as an inattentive awareness. Quite often it's translated very literally as an awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. So that's a very clear way to translate this, but it's too much of a mouthful. Hence I've gone for non-ascertaining awareness. So literally it's an awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. And now what Genla said, its definition, a knower that is a common basis of having a clear appearance of the specifically characterized phenomenon that is its engaged object, and being unable to induce ascertainment with respect to the specifically characterized phenomenon that is its engaged object.
rangi juyu lu juba sede juyu sede kisinye ma sheba na yang zuki zinda ge yu se da juyu sede ngosum la an zinda ge yu se da juyu yi de da chi pare da tokpa le pha she na zinda yu juyu shen yu se de sum de da chi ba cha ngo jisa ya ko labdang kha ma de juyu se ne da zinda yu de go re jisa rangi juyu lu juba sede rangi zinda yu yin ge se ore
Right, when we started this, looking at this text some time ago, we saw that awareness and knowers can be divided into objects and object possessors, with object possessors what we're looking at here, or one of the object possessors, namely consciousness. But objects, we saw there are different types of objects. So here we see an engaged object mentioned. And in the context of direct perceptions, there's an engaged object, and which is synonymous with an object of the mode of apprehension. So those two are synonymous for a direct perceiver. But for conceptual consciousness, then engaged object, object of the mode of apprehension, and determined object, those three are synonymous. So that's probably on page 1 of the text.
juyu da rangi juyu lu jube rangsen sawa nawa insu da nala mange bagi ina koro yu di juyu di rangsen chi ngobo chingu kuro da ngobo chi sawa nama to takpa ru chi na digyo ma da ngobo chingu kuro da jisa rangi juyu lu jube rangsen ngobo chi sawa nala du nangyo du dunjina majewa se nawa chi da dunjina majewa nawa inza sawa nawa se kore sawa nawa se kasi ne dunjina jere na sewu mewa chi chakoro wa de sawa na dunjina matewa cha zangma zangja na de da denige rangi juyu lu rangi zinda juyu yinba rangchen ji ngobo ji de da nangyo du dunjina matewa na wa chi da nen sawa na wa sa ko wa.
Then let's look at the definition. So the definition, you could say, is the nature or the essence of what is a non-ascertaining an awareness. So we see it's a know that is a common basis, and then there are 2 points. So let's look at the first. Having clear appearance of the specifically characterized phenomenon that is its engaged object. We just mentioned then the engaged object for direct perception is synonymous with the object of the mode of apprehension. The specifically characterized phenomenon, that's just another way of saying an impermanent phenomenon or a functioning thing. So the engaged object of a non-ascertaining awareness needs to be an impermanent object. So that's the meaning of specifically characterized phenomenon. And then there needs to be a clear appearance of it. So what does a clear appearance mean? It means that the object appears without being combined with the meaning generality, or the object appears free of a meaning generality, or not mixed with a meaning generality. So if the object alone appears clearly, there's a clear appearance of the object. So that's the meaning of clear appearance. Specifically characterized phenomenon is another way of saying impermanent phenomenon, and that is the engaged object, having those characteristics.
Dunjida rangchen sawa nang sedu nang la yudu da nang wa de dunjida majewa nang wa es nang gu gure la yudu chisa da dunjida majewa nang gu gu na denige na ya lo de la tokpa yo mar da tokpa in na dunjida chene nang gu gu wa chisa tokpa ma yin ba de dige ha gu tu bo de.
In the definition, you see there's no specific mention of whether a non-ascertaining awareness is associated with direct perception or conceptual consciousness. But it's implied here in this first point, clear appearance. Because if the engaged object needs to appear clearly, this implies that there is no presence of a meaning generality. And a meaning generality is always present with a conceptual consciousness. So a conceptual consciousness will not have a clear appearance of its object because the object is combined or mixed together with or it appears combined or appears mixed together with the meaning generality. That's always the case for conceptual consciousnesses. Direct perceptions, though, clearly see the object in that. The object appears without being combined or mixed with a meaning generality. So that here, therefore, is the indication that a non-ascertaining awareness is associated with direct perception and not conceptual consciousness.
Rangi juyu lu jube ransan la ngeba de minuba. Dejita rangi juyu inge ransan sawa na de ba dela ya juyu rangi juyu lu jube ransan se de so la na de rangi juyu inge ransan sawa na de ba dela ngeba de minuba. Denige ngeba de minuba la de ngeba den la de ngazu pene miji ma saro la ya temba de den la gorwa. Jizan den la de gare ngeba de minuba la na Lodigi and di how go we Jampa Geshe Thubten Rabten, Geshe Thubten Rabten. Just a Geshe Thubten Minuba and Komato Bades, or just a Geshe Thubten Minuba, never Thubten Minuba, said never Thubten Minuba. Said the Korongi, call you the Corona Nangora, Ransen the Sawa, no Dungeon Sawa Nangora, now I call Zingores, Zingorete, and call a current Nuba Yomarasena, Mont Bana, Ongeti Tonson, Dennis Dulce being ever. Dehagi, Geshe Thubten Dehagi, Nuba Yomares, Manuba Mewas or Toyo Mares, the Jezak Milua. Denigi, Geshe Thubten Minubig, Sheba Chigla, and the Deniga, Shitum Bala, the Denigi Niga, Chichiniga, that sound you can see, Denig Ripa Chigla, Sheba Chingures, Denig Ripa Chigla, the Nalamanga like Ezere.
So the first bullet point of the definition was talking about the engaged object. There needs to be a clear, the engaged object needs to appear clearly, and it needs to be an impermanent phenomenon. Now we look at the second point. And being unable to induce ascertainment with respect to the specifically characterized phenomenon and that is its engaged object. So the second bullet point then introduces one new term, because we've already seen engaged object and specifically characterized phenomenon. But the non-ascertaining awareness is unable to induce ascertainment with regard to its engaged object. So what that means is ascertainment is ascertainment in a very different context means to pull something, to draw it near. So what is this awareness not able to pull near? That is memory consciousness. In other words, because the engaged object, the engaged object wasn't the non-ascertaining awareness is not able to recall the engaged object. In other words, it cannot induce memory. It cannot induce what was ascertained. Hence, non-ascertaining awareness. It's unable to induce ascertainment, meaning it can't induce memory of what? The engaged object. So what we've seen here thus far is that an object appears, and it appears clearly. So we have the clear appearance, which means it's free from a meaning generality. It's not combined with a meaning generality. And whilst this object being an impermanent phenomenon is apprehended, it cannot induce ascertainment. So it's non-ascertaining. And not being able to induce ascertainment, no memory can be recalled of this object being apprehended.
Bendigo na mange ba se di. Za da de yang du samda de kissing nga yijue la ro yijue la ro. Da nga na mange ba se da su da bu ji le cha cha ba na nga zu gi. Da nga zu le na mang ba mang bu li go ro pe na nga zu gi ji ge nga zu lob ru ro chi de yi gi cha de ka bla en yen la gi pe ne yi lab de ka bla ya chi donachi semno di shandachi la samta peni yigla yodu ane chike migi peni yigsuru stiyaru la rimoro labgi na ane migi tonga yimba la di tata ngamange ba che kasan samno di shandachi la tadu yinigi migi taigor di ine yigi di sebo hagu tugo ma nangor migi nangor di ine di semki nangor donjina madra nawa ine anjele ya samta ane kune Gentugo maro, Atinish to some Gentugo maro. Medibanza, Digi, Wanshe Digi, Jimodi, and now ready Nala Mangaba Chatter. And I'll do you Denigi Nala, Remoro, Chine, the Nala Mangabare. Then I'll do you that Jiggy, Denigi, Yigi Nada, Dana Chushe, Nachi, Labduka, Denigi, and tried to go in Bala di Donda, the Benus Gasori. Hero Chitavena, Hero China, and similar to Shantachi, demo to pay Shuchimo shoot, Janda sometimes Amjolia tried the Hero to go in there, go in Bache, and then in other, she had the Karim by the Hamo, Matoach, and Nala Mangabase, or she had the Nama Bachegua. There's a disu Navi Sheba, the Migi Sheba, the Nigi, Nala Mangaba, and then I'll be Yungorwa.
Non-ascertaining awarenesses are awarenesses that we are all too familiar with. We have had many of these throughout our lives, and an illustration would be a young child who's learning the alphabet. So to learn the alphabet, needing all the letters need to be studied. And so at first maybe the child will have some interest, but perhaps quite quickly will get bored. So the teacher will be writing probably on the blackboard what a letter looks like, and the child will be watching and certainly showing the aspect of some attention, but their mind is maybe much more engaged with something of great interest to them. So their visual sense consciousness, their eye sense consciousness, to that, the object of the letter that the teacher is drawing on the blackboard appears. But it is not ascertained. And how does one know that it's not ascertained? Later the child cannot remember what they had seen. But they had seen something, but it was not ascertained. Hence, no memory can be induced. And of course, this works for the other sense consciousnesses as well. So, if one is watching something and very engaged with what one is watching, and someone says something to you, but because you're so engaged with what you're looking at, that sound that is being said, the ear consciousness, it will appear to the ear consciousness, but it will not be ascertained. So the sound will clearly appear. Sound is an impermanent phenomenon, a specifically characterized phenomenon, but the consciousness or the awareness is unable to later induce ascertainment. In other words, no memory can be induced, and therefore the sound was heard, but it wasn't ascertained. Therefore, it couldn't be remembered.
And 나시 당한 저기 다 그신 이주에 셔야도 이주에 되게 한 저기다 베네 대시 리모델 바직 직대가 유로 직발 샤바이나 베네 당한 저 수수 분바로시나 분바질이야 가 삼로데 샨다질이 바직 베네 자치 녀를 녀보 슈지 녀를 바 삼로 슈첨보 다제 당되게 갑라 가 미기 분바로 통베네 베네 메도로시 다 메도로시 통베나 직 미기딜레 직 수그르 직 통화 임바라 디메도 임바데 녜 마투바나 왕셰디 미기시바 나라마 차데로와 나 디나신 안저 삼모도 봐 지게 잔다 슈치무 통화도 가다 편이 미기 통화도 똑바디야 기르와 미기 지 똑바지리 편이 남사도 직 메도 나 똑 진비게 똑바디야 기고래 이주 차려. 가서 이것은 도고 말아. 매도 도고 말아. 배는 나도 배시에 자 년부슈 진년디도 갑라 둘리에 매도 두시지 다셔 미지케요나 근데 직 통을 매도 통을 이나 숙지 통을 숙리 난거와 매도 난거와 지 난거디 이나 매도 임바디 토마토 와와 토마토 왠자 아니 디미기 셰바디 데니기 매도들라 나라마 차려봐 디가서 이기 셰베자 미기 셰베게다 숙디 통어도 데라 똑바디 기고래 숙 통 똑바디 기고로 와 똑바 미기 숙디 통어도 이기 셰바 똑바지 기고로 와 디진베 똑바지 기고로 와 베니 매도지 잡는 가서 셰년보 년들가라 나는 기신년보 시들가 미디 매도지 두 께베나 눈디 켜베나 미들 매도 난거래 이내 미디기 매도디 진투고 말해 또 두고 데려야 데니기 매도디 데니기 데니마 수디 데니기 수디 통대가 똑바지 기고래 담바 염도 똑바지 기고래 제 똑바지데 딘 똑바디기 데니기 수디 진고르디나 또요 말와 다들 아주 어디디 디시오래 이 세메 또서 또 말다 지다 똑바도 또메 똑바지 기고래 제 진짜 디 똑바디야 이주래 다디 디수디 진고르데 가래 임바 또요 말고 콜레 난고래 미기 셰바 수디 나와래 그 메도에 마도 미기 셰바 나라마로 데 수디 미기 셰바 통도 똑바디야 지 수디 통 똑바지 리고래 디 똑바디야 나라 이주에서 차고래 이주 니리고래 제다 왕시에 통고래 데라 똑바지 기그래 이주래 미기 셰바디 나라망바래 미기 셰바디 나라망바시 디 준비 똑바디 이주시 다들 지바로 권이기 왕시에 통하게 수디 난거와 왕시에들 수디 난거데 메도 난거래 안디나신 똑바디래 메디 진거래 그 유직마다 요 말바데 직례여도 빼는 아주 두스터리 행동하실 때는 미기 행동을 통고래 똑바의 행동 진거와 빼는 잘라 가르쳐는 이슈 통해도 미기 통고래 똑바도 엄마기 두선배 진거와 안디나신 미 드람나바 메도 쳐도 미래 메도 난거 똑바디 가서 어디는 마직 조선 선배기 미직 통선 직대다 나 조선 빈 똑바 진거와 지산 이 권이가 유직바래 권이가 유디 직바래 네가 직대 똑바래 직대 도매 왕셔리도와 지산 왕셔리 나라마 볼래지 똑바디 이주래지 유디 권이 메도디 직바래 차도니까 말 매도에 통고로 와 매도 난고로 와 나의 매도를 마도 디마트와 매도를 마도요 말와 매도 매바인 자다 나의 감 미기 셰발라 감 나의 디그 똑바디게 진능 진고로 와 제가 매도디 똑바 마시들 나와래 매도디 똑바디게 진바래 제가다 왕시디 나와 매도 나요 왕시디 나라망 봐로지 데니기 똑바디 아니 이주에제 매도지 이주에 차고래제
So let's say we're listening to what someone's saying, or we're listening to some music, and we're listening quite intensely. Then, so this ear sense consciousness is very engaged with its objects, sound, music, or speech, or whatever. Then our eye sense consciousness sees a flower. So a flower appears to our eye sense consciousness, but because our ear sense consciousness is so engaged with what is being said, then the flower is not ascertained. It appears, but it isn't ascertained. However, together with the eye sense consciousness, there is also a conceptual consciousness. A conceptual consciousness which apprehends that a flower has been seen. And that conceptual consciousness has the same object as the eye sense consciousness, but the eye sense consciousness is a non-ascertaining awareness, but the conceptual consciousness is actually a correct assumption. So it's a correct assumption that ascertains the flower, but the mental the sense consciousness, the eye sense consciousness, doesn't apprehend the flower, it doesn't ascertain the flower rather, And therefore, the I sense consciousness is non-ascertaining because it's distracted or one's concentrating on sound. But that flower, though, does appear to a conceptual consciousness. And that would be what we looked at last time. This would be an illustration of a correct assumption.
Then Dinigala, Koraniga Yudi, Metodi, Bachibare, Metod, Koniga Yule Cabra, Niga Yudi, Kazingo, Metod Zingorova, Konigala Karanangos, Metod Nangorova, Nigagi, Metod, the Motova Chibare, Nigagi, Topatige, Metod Toyo, Migi Shebate, Metod Toyo Mare, Koniga Karzingos, Metod Zingore, Koniga Yudi Karasan, Metod Re, that Yula, Chibar, Meto in Bachibare, Meto in Batzimba, Chiba Zingore. And Niga Medo Matova Chipare. In a Karikabar Yor Labna, one shade de la Medo de Dunjina Matewa Sawa Natigore. That the Toba de la Medo Nango de Dunjina Medo Mahimba Chilia and the Medo Robi Nawachi, Nawati da Jane, Dunjina Jane Nangore, Dunjina Jane Natigore. Tina Dini Cabar did it. Chesandi Ijudi, Nala Mambolo Chago, Macarasan Colaya, Yudi Medo Nanu, Dunjina Jane Nawa in the Dunjida Majawa Sawa Nawa de Mare, which is the Dunjida Jane Naware, which is the Dunjida Jane Nawa Zanko, and the Nalama Lomare said the Shama. Shanda, Nigagi Medo Nawa Chibare, Niga Medo Zimba Chibare, Medo Nawa Nangore, Medo Zingore, and you Medo the Motoba Chibare, when he read it, that Nansule Cabaret.
So of those three consciousnesses, the ear sense consciousness, the eye sense consciousness, and the conceptual consciousness, let's look at just the two then, being the eye sense consciousness and the conceptual consciousness. So both of them have as their same object the flower, the beautiful flower, and both of these consciousnesses, so the eye sense consciousness and the conceptual consciousness, to both of those, the flower appears. To both of them, the flower is apprehended. And thirdly, to both of them, the flower is not realized. So they have these three things in common. The eye sense consciousness and the conceptual consciousness, that is a correct assumption. To both of them, the object is a flower, which appears, is apprehended, but is not realized. So it's not realized because for the sense consciousness, it's a non-ascertaining awareness. It's not realized by the correct assumption because the correct assumption is controvertible. It doesn't realize its object. So we have these two consciousnesses have three things in common with the object. It's the same flower that appears and is apprehended and not realized. The difference comes in how the object appears. So to the sense consciousness, which is a non-ascertaining non-ascertaining awareness, we see in the definition, there's a clear appearance of the object, which remember means the object is directly perceived, in this case by an eye sense consciousness. And that's the difference, because to the conceptual consciousness, the correct assumption, the flower does appear, but it is mixed with the meaning generality of flower. And because it's mixed with the meaning, or it's combined with the meaning generality of flower, there's not a clear appearance to it. And because there's not a clear appearance of the object flower, the conceptual consciousness cannot be a non-ascertaining awareness. So, just again, to both of these consciousnesses, the same object appears. The difference is, to the sense consciousness, the eye sense consciousness, the flower itself appears, and therefore it appears clearly. But to the conceptual consciousness, the correct assumption, the flower appears mixed or combined with a meaning generality, and therefore it cannot be a non-ascertaining awareness.
안주 dinima chikna juge dik 메도디게 다 메도디 기지기지 지르고래 기지기지 지바래 아니 미다와래 사지게 마직 대세 자요도 나가 삼는 날이야 어제 니를 디셰시나 저거도 대신 저기 작년부 년도에 갑려야 아니 년도에 갑려 메도 통해야지 지 나라만 레라로다 메도 두고 말아 네 김장 가르쳐고서는 이기 셰바디 이기 셰비 슈크디 차상편이 저게 잔야야 될바 따샤래 이기 삼로디 바 잔야야들 슈크치비 따샤벤자 와시기 통해들 와시들 슈크시라 메바를 차송데 지나 디네자 디 긴제네고 와시디 메도도 또 마투바데 가르치르스네 이기 셰바디 삼로도 슈크 차상편이 자들 바 따샤벤자 디기 긴제네 아니 가실레 미기 셰바디 메도도 또 마투바디 김센디레고
So here an important point to make is, so why, when one is listening to a beautiful sound, why does one not see the beautiful flower? Because both the sound, that is an object, it appears to the ear sense consciousness. Likewise, the flower, being the object, appears to the eye sense consciousness. So both appear, but only one is ascertained. The sound is being ascertained, not the flower. So why is that? That is due to the mental consciousness that's present. The mental consciousness has much more power or strength than the sense consciousness. And the mental consciousness is engaged with the object of the ear sense consciousness. So one's mental consciousness is engaged with the object of the ear sense consciousness, and due to the power of that mental consciousness, the eye sense consciousness doesn't ascertain the object that appears to it. So it's the mental consciousness that assists the one sense consciousness and also overpowers, you could say, or not overpowers, but really defeats the other sense consciousness. So the mental consciousness here plays a crucial role.
이시 돈에 댐비 대화니디 이시비 돈 대화 숙시라 체투체 용거래. 제가 와실레 댐비게 둥아이네 아니 이실레 댐비 둥아디에 둥아 숙체래. 제가 되네 자 맞아 와실레 댐비 둥아지 리기요베네 이시비 돈에 대화게 삼다베네 이시비 돈에 와시기 둥아디게 봐 둥아디게 봐 까지 둥아 춘춘로서 두고 그래 제래.
And this is an important point to retain, that this mental consciousness is of far greater strength than the sense consciousness. And why this is such an important point to remember is that we experience both happiness and suffering, pleasure and pain, either through the body, so through the physical door, or the mental door. So the mental consciousness being of much greater strength, mental suffering totally dominates physical pain. Mental pain tends to be far more, I don't know, not distracting, but far worse than physical pain. Mental suffering can overpower physical happiness, but so too can mental happiness overcome physical suffering. Key point here is that our mental consciousness has much more strength than our physical consciousness. And therefore, it's our mental consciousness that we need to put our time and energy into developing because of its greater power and strength.
that's the Chiro, the Jaurum Chiro, the Page, Sunja, so the Pebus Topora Ganga Shivena, the Nigu Sunja, Shudi Cable, some of the Yenia, Devazeju, the Pej, some of the Pej, Yenia, Chukchimbu Yovanza, Desa de Ganga Maso, or Chagore. Jisan Dosale Ganga Hakugo Mare, Jisan Garson, Ganga Yudur, the Asa Yigi Shebek, the Shukcheta Chimboza, Lugi Tone, Ganga Yobadi, Soadi, Shara Hakutu Gomara. Now, Sunje the Pa Zamja, and the Micho on the Jarumchas, Sunje Zamja Pa Petawena. That was the new Dejinama Duena, Sanga, Galek, Tudin, or that Lamsa, the sheet, and to give Jag, Dubatunye the Pa, Makili, and my child. Child, then there's a Galek would be more Gamba Naguyo, Sorota, there's a Gala Tower, Dini, Shini Ganga, the Shini Howard, that didn't Lamsa Yogo, don't have Gamba Pajaya, that didn't Jinguru, just Shini Hako, didn't.
We can also see this in terms of the illustration of if we have a strong aspiration to engage in the Dharma, to cultivate the Dharma within ourselves. And let's say the weather's really unpleasant, it's very hot or it's very cold, but if we have a strong wish to cultivate the minds of the Dharma within us, then obstacles like that, physical suffering like that, can easily be overcome by having a strong wish to cultivate the minds of the Dharma within us. Or if you think of times when you've attended teachings by His Holiness or Lama Zopa, then sometimes the conditions are not ideal. Perhaps where one stays, it has to stay isn't so comfortable, one has to get up early, travel far, or the hours that one needs to sit are very long. But because of one's great desire to hear the teachings of the Dharma from one's Lama, those kinds of problems one may joke about, but they don't overcome one. They are very manageable. And we overcome them with comparative ease. But when the time comes and His Holiness or Rinpoche leaves, then slowly that aspiration for the Dharma, that weakens in strength. This mind, this mental consciousness that is the mind or the consciousness of aspiration for the Dharma, as that weakens, those same difficulties now grow in strength and may well overpower us. Engaging in hearing the Dharma or thinking about the Dharma for the same length of time or in the same uncomfortable physical conditions overpower us. So what hasn't changed is the physical conditions. What has changed is the mental attitude, the mental consciousness.
야, 안에 이기 셰발 봐. 장도로 그냥 제어가 망치 디기도 이기 셰바. 하는 거 저기 추림 송고래 해야다. 안에 진비 냠내 제어래. 안에随便 냠내 제어래. 준주 정보래. 안에 딩에시 신의 공부래. 안 동요도 베시라 공부래. 장바라 자와 공부래. 데니기 냠내 지다 이기 셰비 걸 이기 셰발에 정도로 제사 그냥 송망치 디 송고로 봐. 진짜 디거래 미기 야고 암조 야고 제데 데 거스 지게 디고 시고마 와시기 류기 초와다 디니고 시라 시고마 가슨 조 장도를 지야디 이기 셰비고 장도를 지야 진짜 이기 셰비고 장도 이기 셰바들 장도를 지야 이기 셰비 교인들이 사제 근데 이기 셰바들 약고 자도는 와시디고 랑신고 그 약고 차루고 지기 차투고 봐 되는자 이 냠는지도 갑라 조 아주 로 장도를 지야 이기 셰바를 장도를 지야 시도아 디시메 지당아 저기 럼림곰 제도 가르공고스네 뇌중 공고래 세도 이기셰바시오라 진비냠는 제오레 추림 쇠바 전주 삼대 동유도비 셰라고 잠바데 제와 니지 공부를 세상 세상 이기셰바로와 제가 이기셰바를 장도를 장장 송고 세상 가르스네 이기셰바디 장도를 제투에나 왕시 균 메바디 고랑신기 메바 차루고.
And similarly, when we engaging in meditating on Dharma topics, such as the topics of the Lama, we are primarily engaging in the cultivation of, or in the utilization of our mental consciousnesses. We're not utilizing our sense consciousnesses. We're there meditating on the Dharma, thinking, reflecting on the Dharma. So we're not engaging in objects of sight or sound or taste, touch or smell. So we're meditating on topics such as generosity, ethical restraint, patience, choice, perseverance, concentration, wisdom, love, compassion, all of these. And as we are, to the extent that we are engaged with those topics, to that extent, objects of the sense consciousnesses will not impact on us. In other words, we won't be distracted and certainly not be overcome by physical sensations or by objects of the senses due to the dominance of our mental consciousness, the mental consciousnesses that are engaged in that process of reflection and meditation. So therefore, the more we develop our mental consciousness, then not only the more effective are the meditations, but the less distracted we are by objects of the senses or feelings or sensations within the body.
안데네 나나가 저 나라망에 벌로 미기 시비게 나라망에 봐서 왕셰 나라망에 봐서 롭정 전에 베주스 개민도 아디가 냠는 제알라지서 베주 민도 와선비게 양 삼로 지용시기로 저 나라망에 거기 시에디 베주스 개민도 아딘 뒤서 털라데도 와선비게 삼로 용시기로
It is quite possible that one may have the thought that we're having to study non-ascertaining awarenesses, which is a bit strange. It's not something that we utilize, so why are we studying this?
nangla manga padan diniki jesu tane nyomo mangbali gore mil kyonje che dine yungore sosoge dokwa tesum sae dine yungore jisa dine yasa sosuge nangla chik nangwa che manghe ba jin nangla manga bajinna kong teme doyo marba mato wanzang diniki nangwa yumchen jine ode dire khodi ji ni re slapshawana pen miji diwa pa troxe midi diwa miji ji homba tonga je ane midi suimba da takta hamhoache an dade yode deji midi de kuma jala la son roda la son de an garso deji midi miglia tonsche nawale de ina chemenge yo mare dadi soso dokwasan o jikna son di robushi pechi dinser san miglia inser soso da jelia di mendo samje o di yure samje lamsan de le dokwasaage na di kemedo sambigidin deji jikdini yon leson lebaji tonson ina sui na hago masa ina midi mendo wasan be dogo sache lamsa ani dogo tesum sa tesum di dogo sane andilia ani diresha sme kyonje je ya da ji yongse ji sang anju yongya de gasen nangla manga ba le naza manglo be ki dele de nang anju tesum na je da dine de nang anju ya nyomo ba je di yongure je da dine inza de sugi nangla manga ba ji du sin lo lang anju samta 대시 디 가래 생각 주시되 어디네 낭라마 불러 레샤스 제가 낭라마 올로 거의 제수잖아 딱다 차기 말에 노출을 차기래서 제가 딱다 용 말에서 비게 내가 저거 하고 거야지 계침부를 해서 그래 제가 낭라마 가서 하고 봐나
Of course, there is a great purpose in understanding this presentation on non-ascertaining awarenesses. Because in general, of course, we need to understand this topic of Lorig, of Buddhist psychology, because in order to transform our mind, we have to understand our minds. We need to understand our innermost workings. And it's through knowing our minds well that we will have the skill to transform ourselves. So here, by understanding what is a non-ascertaining awareness and what its place is within our psychology, we will come to know, first of all, what a non-ascertaining awareness is and why it is not reliable. What are the potential faults that come from relying on a non-ascertaining awareness? So, for example, if someone walks past us and we see them, but we don't ascertain them, so it's the sense consciousness does not ascertain the object of this person that went before one, and a while later you notice something is missing, and you think, oh, I've lost this. I wonder if someone stole it, or maybe just took it. And hang on, I saw someone go by. I think it was that person. I think that person stole from me. So here we have a chain going on. From a non-ascertaining awareness follows doubt, because memory can't be induced, but doubt can be. And from when a doubt arises, should we believe that doubt and not investigate further, our afflictions are going to come and we may criticize someone or falsely accuse someone. So this is a sequence that we need to gain clarity on. From a non-ascertaining awareness, memory cannot follow, but doubt can. And that doubt is not necessarily reliable. So therefore, we need to be on guard, because from doubt, wrong views can come, afflicted minds can come, etc. So therefore, we need to understand the role in the sequence of our psychology that non-ascertaining awarenesses play.
Dandala Garasungor Senanga to get Nala Mangeba Sada, Tesum Sada, the Solodiki, you disable how Goyo Mares, Hamo and Zang, the Nigu Logi Jesu Janjang of the Lagaro Tevene, Laga de Tata Yumba, Sticks and Gabriel Nodri Chemo Yungure, Yan Gabriele, Donna Juba Yung Sigre, what Tata Cheving Havayo Mares. There's not Danganzo Carre Chevene, Pene, Carre Chevene, Manzuge, you did Caricho and Java, the Tata Cheming Evanyeje. 체매 또제 체매 에바니제 안 제바이나 안 마노와나 딱다 단다도 주투와 준 거래. 제가 체매 에바니고 거래. 체매 에바 많이 받지. 데니기 나라 망에바당. 데네 태좀다. 데니기 지수 장바이나 아니 노트 신부 용식이래. 제가 디술로 양다 과시 말해. 제가 디술을 때내 안 저기 좀제 야고 튼투 말해. 제가 데니 마장 안 저기 레가 레디 지금 저기 최냠내 제배다 가르 제비네 간실레 마음을 유디 가르 제고는 제고야 돼 당보 체매 딱딱 내가 니제 제고그래서 제가 디소 나저 삼노 땅에 내가 제고스면 삼 땅 당보 삼노들이 되게 디 제고서 비디 제네 약고여서 몇 삼노디 체마레샤 나라망가브레샤 태솜레샤 록셰레샤 당보 제바라 제고그래서 올 땅에서 데니기 제바체네 체명에바 녀바 있나 아니 얘도 어다디 노트레샤서 하고 도르 딘딱바지 두사를 선배는 레가데 제디 디고고레스 지나 디수파 자상아 주기 나라망에 봐서 태좀사디 소 유디셰라 니수 야고 신야라 신요마 바제리 바체 차되어 되제레 지나 디인자 골로 노트레시레 인자 디때 만줄이야 먼저 강화용야기 유지 되네 차고래 세상 디소 먼저 강화 세워자 디스니로되게 릭릭되게 하고 같이 안들 하고도 안 디기 제소 마다야기 개발용 거래 제래.
We need to understand the workings of all these various consciousnesses, because it helps us understand ourselves better. We develop knowledge, and on the basis of knowledge we can develop wisdom. So through the presentation that we've gone through so far, these 13 pages thus far, we've come to see which consciousnesses realize their objects, and therefore know their object unmistakenly, and which ones are non-valid, where we are now, those which do not realize their object. And this is important because we need to investigate our inner workings we need to investigate our minds, our way of thinking. We need to analyze what we think we know. We need to analyze whether objects exist in the way they appear or not. Do we understand reality or not? To understand reality, to understand an object correctly, we need to also understand consciousness well. So we need to understand that, for example, valid cognition. It is valid cognition that realizes an object. And its non-valid cognizers do not. And if we rely on non-valid cognizers, mistakes may well follow. And depending on how mistaken the non-valid cognizer is, a graver error can follow. One can be taken in the direction of a wrong consciousness, away from a valid cognizer. And the result of that is not only greater ignorance, but compounding our obstacles to developing knowledge. The more ignorance we have, the more greater our mistakes in our knowledge is, the more problems we'll have, the more difficulties we have. We all want to, of course, overcome our problems. This comes about through developing wisdom. For a consciousness to be one of wisdom, it has to be, it has to realize its object. So we need to then understand our consciousnesses that are valid and realize their object, and those which have varying degrees of error to them.
Nala mangwe tsingi shade injimije rangi juyulu jube ransan sawa nawa lagore madon rangyu lu jube ransan sawa nawa lamna nitiki mares tela nala ma lo imbi ngeba yo ma kyabgu mares bene rangyu dilabido rangi yu dila rangi nangyu shenyu juyu sada rimpa sumsyongruwa chesa desa rangyu lu jubala na kabrela rangi nangyu le yong sigres chesa rangi juye tamara yong sigres tene inzada bene garungombo naye wanshe labaina bene garungombo naye wanshe labaina korong juyu de garasne garungombo de charyore chesa da kola nangyu de la garungombo de juyu re kola nangyu re nigare tene gari kabo dia nangyu res de gari kabo de juyu mares chesa da garungombo naye wanshe de la gari nangorsa garungombo nangore gari kabo nangore chesa gari kabo de la ransa kabo de ransa rwa ransa re chesa garungombo naye wanshe de la gari nangorsa rangi yu gari kabo nangore tenji na madwa sawa naware ine de la ngeba tin nyugyo mare chesa da nan ko nalama lo charu res chesa nalama lo rebes na dan rangi yulu jubege ransa sawa nawala na nalama lo charu res ine ko nalama lo mare se ore.
Let's return to the text. So here now, just below the definition, I'll read it out, but just first to say it's really repeating the definition, but skipping 2 words. However, one should know the manner in which not to posit as the definition of some things being a non-ascertaining awareness. That which is a common basis of having clear appearance of the specifically characterized phenomenon that is its object, and being unable to induce ascertainment with respect to the specifically characterized phenomenon that is its object. So here we have the definition repeated, but it just mentions at the end of each bullet point the word object, whereas in the definition it was clearly specified engaged object. So in this second definition, which is mistaken, which kind of object isn't specified? And this is then a definition that one should not posit. In other words, it's faulty. And now an example is given to explain why the type of object, namely engaged object, needs to be mentioned. This is because a sense consciousness that sees snow mountains as blue, sees as blue the white color of snow mountains, which is its engaged object, and therefore does not see clearly the specifically characterized phenomenon, which is its engaged object. Okay, so it's a bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that when an eye sense consciousness sees a snow mountain, being a snow mountain, it's going to be white in color, but sees it as blue. So for whatever reason, the snow mountain is appearing as blue to the sense consciousness. There are a couple of objects involved here. There's an appearing object and an engaged object. So the appearing object is, well, there are actually two appearing objects and an engaged object. One appearing object is the white snow mountain, so what actually exists. The second appearing object is the blue snow mountain, and the engaged object is the blue snow mountain. So what we have here is, so of these objects, there are two appearing objects, a white snow mountain and a blue snow mountain, and one engaged object, blue snow mountain. Then the question comes, is this a non-ascertaining awareness because the white snow mountain hasn't been ascertained? And the answer would be no, if you're using this, because the answer would be no, because if we look at the definition, the actual definition, there needs to be a clear appearance of the specifically characterized phenomenon that is the engaged object. So, snow mountain is a specifically characterized phenomenon. It's impermanent and momentarily changes. But there is not a clear appearance of the white snow mountain as the engaged object, because the engaged object is only the blue snow mountain. So therefore, it cannot be a non-ascertaining awareness, because the engaged object is a non-existent, whereas the engaged object has to be an existent. So therefore, for this definition to be correct, it has to specify which object one is talking about. Because if just the word object is mentioned, then white snow mountain is the appearing object, and it is impermanent, and there is a clear appearance of the appearing object. So the white snow mountain as the appearing object will fulfill the second definition, but that does not make it non-ascertaining. So you have to mention in the definition the word engaged.
Denigi nala mangi be chenjiro jikara shagudula na da jina nala ba lo de la ngaga yungure wa migi shebi ngo jube nala mangi be ta ane nawe shebi ge ngo jube nala ma ba ne sheba ji sheba ne lu ji shebi ge ane nala ma ngo jube nala ma ba de yi yung sum jube nala mangi ba sa di ma zo re sha nala ma lo zhu sha chu de wang bo nga ji yi sheba ji yi yung sum ji de le ya reji de zhu sha chu ba chenji de la yu de ji dan ko yewa ma so na di na yewa de che me de yewa che ba na de yewa zhu sha chu de mi ge wang bo sum na ka sa mi ge wang bi ge ane mi ge she bi ge ngo ji be na la ma ba ne ane na yu she ba ne yu she ba ji she ba lu yi she ba yi she ba na la ma ba se no lo zhu sha chu de wa.
Just to very briefly then recap what was just said before, because I don't think it was fantastically clear, but anyway, the point that is being made in brief is that to define a non-ascertaining awareness, it has to be specified that it's in relation to the engaged object, because if it's not specified, where an engaged object is engaged erroneously, making it a wrong consciousness, then because the appearing object would still be engaged, would be ascertained correctly, then one would say that would be a non-ascertaining awareness for a wrong consciousness, which is not the case. That's all that means. So moving on to, we don't have usually we have for each of the awarenesses, definition, divisions, and illustrations. Here there's no division, so we'll just present that. So the divisions of non-ascertaining awarenesses are 6. There are the 5 relating to sense consciousnesses. So ear, sight, ear, nose, taste, touch. Yeah, I think that's 5. So the 5 smell. Thank you. Yeah. So the 5 relating to sense and the 1 for mental, making it 6. So those will be the divisions, because it's, remember, only for direct perception. So the ones relating to sense, those 5, and mental, making 6.
제일 가르쳤대. 인건보 통나 마서 통나나 대지지 통나 공부 통서 통마선 집에 태좀 잼바지기 됐어. 태좀지 잼바지기기 내내기 공부 통서 통마선 선비기 태좀 잼바지기기 원비 원숨디 나라마 바레스. 변날 디나신 당은 잘라야 어딘이 자디 퇴선 퇴마선 선비기 태좀 잼바지기기 나위 원비 원숨디다 디샤오레 나라마가 차로 가서 차기로와 지바 차로와.
The first one, a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue that induces the doubt that wonders, did I see blue or not? The sense direct perceivers we covered a while ago on page 3, and so all 5 of those have all 5 of the sense direct perceivers have non-ascertaining awarenesses as a division, as they do direct valid cognizers. So here as the illustration is, one is unable to induce a memory consciousness recalling of whether one saw blue or not. One has rather induces a doubt, because that is what non-ascertaining awarenesses can do. They can only induce a doubt. They can't induce a memory consciousness. So this illustration is for the eye sense consciousness, but of course applies to all 5. So did I hear what was said or not? So that's an illustration of a non-ascertaining awareness of a sense consciousness. And then the next 2 illustrations, which we covered earlier on the 4th page, so the other divisions within direct perception. Mental direct perceivers in the continua of ordinary beings apprehending the 5 objects, forms, and so forth, and self-knowers experiencing those mental direct perceivers.
나야 도고 말해시고 다 유네 가지고 kon 도고 말해시래. 베네 당한 쪽에 한테 데데 디수셰디 다 랑규 바다 대도리 바다 샘자바 디수 좀더 오마디기 마셔야지 시고래. 난 땡큐 바로 신나 데네게 나라마 볼로레데 이네 그런 게 유지 도고 그랬어. 가르도 그랬으면 그런 게 나와 그런 나위 나와셔야지 나유셔야지 나 그런 하는 나와지 도고 그랬어. 진짜 그런 셰바레 지상 셰바를 땡큐버 갈로 셰바레 지상 셰바인자 사신 리발하기도 와서 그런 거 직도고 리고레스 가르 리고레스네 셰바 로셰데 셰바 가르시네 그런 직도고레스 가르도고레스 그런은 나와도 도고레지래 로셰디게 자상 로셰다 나나망을 받아 태좀나 가르시네 그런은 나와지요레 디 나와 도고레지래 나 kellinge 태좀 kellinge 로셰 kellinge 이네 유 다디 대속이 가르스는 좀더 어마만식이 가르스는 낭라 마바 태좀노 로셰도 유 가야 도고 말래 거와 가야 도고 말해서 거와 제 텐주르 비게 갈로스는 코로나도 로셰랑 낭라 마바 태좀노 유 가야 코로나 진다 유도 도고 말마도 코로나 나외 나와도 도고 그래서 진짜 가야지 도고 그래서 마도 유네 마도가 유네요 말해서 거다 세멘데 제시디 유도로 세메르와 디멘베게 세마다 제시다 세마 가야마 세마다 제시 마이나 얀다디기 유가야 도고 말해지래 로릭 균나네 모솜다 제바 제시세디 유도고 하다 좀 너무 맛이나 Shandadiki and Yijuda Tiazum Loshe Sadi Nala say you can do Kaya do Marilla. The Tenju Bigi Galos, Sheva Ganeshin, Yuji do what is it? Moto Guinea Maricaya was ranking now at the door, do what is it?
What we've heard here is that a non-ascertaining awareness does not realize its object. And this is the view of the Buddhist philosophers that ascribe to the tenets of the Svatantika Chittamatrans, the Sautantikas, and the Vaibhashikas. And in fact, those four Buddhist philosophical schools state that not only do they state that non-ascertaining awarenesses do not realize any object at all, nor do doubt or wrong consciousnesses or correct assumptions. They don't realize an object. But this is not the view of the Prasangika. They say, remember the definition of consciousness, clear and knowing. All consciousnesses, therefore, realize an object. And a non-ascertaining awareness, an awareness that doesn't ascertain its object, does realize its object, according to the Prasangika. Because the appearing object, that is realized. So that is a distinction across the tenets. So according to the Prasangika, non-ascertaining awareness realizes its object. Yes, not its engaged object, but it does realize its appearing object. Also, wrong consciousnesses realize its object. Every consciousness, because it's clear and knowing, realizes an object.
Shepa saying to law love the Rigba, say Lu Ting Shake the Rigba like it was Rigba la do Topa, Siguro, just that Rigba la do Topa language, that usually rigor to wars, Chicano, Chick to wars, that the Nzako Riba la do call more the local session down was you Chican to wars, and then you be the Shigoro. Chisada, one among the minima, Gerard de Manche Mashi, the Riba, see the Riba Lu Ting Java Chiba Chagurua, just a Riba Lu Ting that Loshe da Tiazum that is a Riba and the Nalamang about the Riba Lorwa, Riba was. And the Riba and the Chick Togore say Lego Maribes and the Carrigore, Marina Riba Layomar was, just a Pene Marina Riba Layomar, and Riba Labian, the Chick Rigo, Rikland, Topalco was, and the Riba said, Don't that hang into us and Jura Kubana, the San Lavalia. The
non-Prasangikas have difficulty giving a satisfactory answer to the Prasangikas when they say every consciousness, being clear and knowing, we all have the same definition, therefore realized an object. Because knowing in clear and knowing means to realize the object. So therefore, if it's a consciousness, it realizes an object. And the non-Prasangikas struggle to give an acceptable answer to that consequence or the doubt thrown at them by the Prasangikas.
The tenju bata the omegi shevagi tiniki dotala kebaru bishidinesi. That we did in the kebar in the dang to gari yaga di re lamna that tenju bigi shedi divare some chagorwada.
As we tend to accept the highest philosophical views, then we'll go with a Prasangika who would say, in this illustration here about the the snow mountain that appears as blue, then this is a non-ascertaining, this is a wrong consciousness, but it does realize an object. It realizes the appearing object that is a white snow mountain, because you remember there were the two appearing objects, a white snow mountain and the blue snow mountain. So the white snow mountain is realized. Therefore, even a wrong consciousness realizes its object.
그런 나와치 두고 그런 나와치 난 그런 나유스나 그런 나 나유를 먹고 그런 나라 나와시 요래 디도그래를 같은 유비다 나디 가르가보 동어 가시면 그런 직 나와 중고래 디도고래 제래.
Okay, I made a mistake. So for the Prasangika, they say what the wrong consciousness realizes is what appears to it. And that's all they say. So there are differing appearing objects, as we've heard in this illustration. So Prasangika say it's because it's a consciousness, it realizes its object. And what is its object? What appears to it. And that is sufficient.
상이 된마 태좀 요걸 마셔야지. 아니 대샤신에 주어를 유나 네. 제가 신나려고도 뒤서르지.
That brings us then to the end of non-ascertaining awarenesses. We'll continue tomorrow with doubt. Maybe with certainty we'll continue with doubt. If you have questions, we have some time. Yes, Steve.
In relation to the example of the ear sense consciousness hearing a beautiful sound and the eye sense consciousness perceiving a beautiful flower, each one has an associated mental consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean in this example there's 4 consciousnesses here?
Okay, so I got a bit distracted. Something happened here. If I got it right, when we're hearing something, we're distracted by what we're hearing, so we don't see the flower, does both the ear sense consciousness and the eye sense consciousness, do they both have their own associated mental consciousness? Okay.
똑같이 연구해서 어디. 장년도. This is 똑같이 리그래. 이제 시 리그로 하고 그래서네. 근데 비니 장년도가 돼 왕시디가 잘 두고래 똑같이 디 당보다 디가서 왕시디 기용도 왕시인에 제라 똑같이 리그래. 당보 왕시기 되네 다데 디시도 당도 디나 짐바를 마선에 디시오래. 저기 자로 거 암초도 거의 당보 자데 암초가 왕시기. 데 람사 왕시디기 기지 니발라 자지미 이용을 좀 기기래서 데 나라마 버래. 디기 기지 니바 디기 기지 죽다 마타도 자지미 똑같이 기기래서 진짜 똑같이 다 remba 숨리가. 디나시 미기 셰바디기 숙지 나노도 미기 셰바게 람사 델야 아니 디 지젤라 이기 셰바지 숙디 데네기 숙 나야기 이기 용어서 기용을 데 나라마 버래. 디슈 데마타도 데네기 숙디 짐비 똑같이 기용 거래. 데디 코케타로스 데네 기용 거라. 무슨 디기 주 데마타도 가르치게 그러세네 디 유디 짐비게 나웨게 이용어서 기고래. 디 슈라 이 유디 통웨게 똑같이 기고래.
Correct. And we can take it a little bit more detailed than those 4. When we hear something, so we have the ear sense consciousness, which is immediately followed by a mental direct perception, which is a non-ascertaining consciousness. And that is, through that power, it induces the conceptual consciousness. So associated with what we are listening to, there now are 3. So the ear sense consciousness, then the non-ascertaining mental direct perception, and that induces the conceptual consciousness. And we have the same 3 for the flower that is not being ascertained. So there's the eye sense consciousness, which through its power induces the mental sense consciousness, which is non-ascertaining, which induces the conceptual consciousness. So therefore we can go even deeper and say 6. Mm-hmm.
From that question, in that example, what determines which sense power has prevalence, whether the ear or the eye.
Yeah. So because it was said before that it's a mental consciousness that has the power, through its power, one concentrates on the sound rather than the sight. So of these two mental consciousnesses, then, what is it about the one that makes it dominate rather than the other? Okay. Then it didn't also talk by ni yore, ni dan nam tu yore.
Yi sheba de shuk che de kawa tang sha sen to ka da chol pa tang ro. De ro de ji da ko ji samlo khoron yi sheba khoron ji da ne phni ge da de to ko ke san rin ba she ro. Ine da yi sheba samlo shuk che kawa sam tang ro sen pa da de tang she go ro. Ji da pe na zum mini 징구여 반에 미직디기 백코로 초데 지부지부 초선 지기 도구로와 어디로 샤기도와 지금 이게 삼로코로 백코로 편이 다들 가나 당샤한자 배슈기 파지 당샤다 편이 죽통에 될 슈마 메로와 미자 또 도구 말이지.
Of the two mental consciousnesses, it's whichever then has more strength, that's the direction of the stream of consciousness, maybe we can say it like that, yeah? So if one is particularly engaged in what's being said, then that is a strong mental consciousness that's engaged in what the conversation or the lovely music. And therefore, another mental consciousness, it will struggle to overpower that. Unless, I don't know, something particularly beautiful comes before one. So something like that. But it's due to whichever of the mental consciousnesses has more strength.
bene 다디기 년뒤갑라 인지미주 숙디 통어도 나라만 양야 차게를 베선 차봐요 뭐 용부 말봐 bene 다디 년베네 지 야주 숙시 통어도 남사 이기 셰바데 파지 다지는 다디 어디야 두스비 네가 통토요 다디 년투와 베네 도투와 네가 용식이로와 아 뒤지를 용구로와 뒤지페디 빈 다디 년뒤베갈 미스톤도 숙 어디지 숙시 두스비 남사 도투와 네가 용거리데 다데 나라마 세데스 백코로데 숙초를 삼 günema다 패치 백코로 삼 백코로 초 차상 편이 당시야지 딘통에도 나라마 차게 되라고 지산 파지에 당지 딘의 숙통에 내려야 이 삼도 당 투고네 네가 또 투고
However, it's certainly possible and of course happens that so one's listening intently, what appears before one is not ascertained, but then for whatever reason one's interest is drawn to it, and then one also sees and hears at the same time. So that is possible, that while you're following the conversation, say, one is also aware of what one is seeing. So it's not necessarily so that one cannot see and hear at the same time, for example. So one of those consciousnesses may be non-ascertaining, but perhaps neither are. So both is possible. Cameron?
Just in relation to the Prasangika view on non-ascertaining awareness, realising its object. In relation to realising the nature of self, is the Prasangika view misleading in meditations?
So, the Prasangika say that the non-ascertaining awareness can realizes its object. So then in the context of realizing selflessness, is it?
Yes, selflessness.
Realizing selflessness, is the Prasangika view perhaps misleading there?
Yeah.
How so?
Because it's a non-ascertaining awareness. Is that a correct? That's not a correct observation of the nature of self.
So when we realize selflessness, is that realizing consciousness and non-ascertaining awareness?
Hang on, sorry, say that again.
I'm just trying to understand, yeah?
Yeah. My understanding was that if we're meditating on selflessness,
yes,
if we enter into a non-ascertaining awareness in relation to that object,
yes,
then that would be an incorrect observation in that itself. That would be a mistaken consciousness.
yes. Okay.
So what I'm saying is that view misleading to us.
Okay. I think I understand, but let me try and ask and we see what comes back, okay?
Yeah.
다음에 또 왔는데 나나가 책을 또 민코로 또 하려고 와도 또 말해 매지다 네 나라가 말해시 네 나라 가서 다음에 또 올랍디데 다음에 또도 레려고 막 호숨 삼나다 제바 두신 제바지 다음에 즉 대디제스에 타줘봐 또는데 네 나라만 책을 말해 네 채마라 그래서 기지 당보 또 번능한도 제바 채마다 책고래 나 니는 마 지시 차로 그러와
So when one realizes selflessness, so there are many levels to realization of selflessness. It won't be a non-ascertaining awareness, because a non-ascertaining awareness is associated with direct perception. So when one first gains a realization of selflessness, that will be a inferential valid cognizer. So that we looked at previously, that's induced by reasoning. So this is a inferential valid cognizer that realizes the object, not directly, but realizes the object. So it's not non-ascertaining, and because non-ascertaining can't be a direct perception, and even when it's conceptual, the object is realized in dependence on reasoning. So it's a whole process of reasoning. There's no non-ascertainment there. Wait, just a sec.
나나마 별로 영화에 유디를 수르마도 다시 수마인갈 다시 나나마 별로 리메사래 나나 별로 게 차선 수 유지 수지마도 수르지마도 다음에 봐선 다된 아주 나나마 로시리 다음에 봐 진비글로 되게 차선 똑발마도 나나주 귤라 가소래 요말래 그래서 다 파비 귤라 요르데 디몬숨 채마샤들와 다음에 봐다 미다 봐서 디솔이야 나나를 리긴 말이 디스 진비 유차다 나비게 줄로 차상 똑바지 알리요 똑바다 무슨을 말이요
Non-ascertaining awarenesses are for ordinary beings, for non-Arya beings, are only associated with objects of form. So the objects of the senses, they won't be associated with conceptual objects such as emptiness or selflessness. For a Arya being, those objects are realized directly, but they don't have yogic direct perceivers don't have non-ascertaining awarenesses. That was in that division on page 4, perhaps. So non-yogic direct perceivers, perceivers in continuum of ordinary beings, if there's a non-ascertaining awareness, it will be associated with an object of form.
So when we do meditation on selflessness, we may enter into non-ascertaining awarenesses.
Okay. Then ngato dakme gikola samdu. Then ngato nangabanepa lok kia tugirebe.
나나 이주에서 이거 대시 맞아 나 된지다 제 나마 데 이주 가지고 다음에 봐서 삼단 다음에 봐서 그 다음에 준비 또 시키기로 그래서 이주에
When meditating on selflessness, people of our capacity, then our understanding will give rise to a correct assumption, not non-ascertaining awareness, correct assumption. So where the object isn't realized, but the object isn't realized, but it is a correct assumption. Okay. Okay.
예,
Okay, thank you very much.